For today's video, we are going to learn about positional chess concepts that every player must know. Now, the main principle in playing in the opening is rapid development, and we all know that, but when it comes to practical play, all players forget about this rule. Now, in this first game, we are going to look at a French defense game, which we made a video on how to play to French. I will encourage you to go watch it if you want to play the French. Now, after white plays d4 and black plays pawn to d5, here white chooses to play knight to d2, which is the Tarrasch variation. So after knight d2, black plays pawn to c5, trying to encounter white's center and put huge pressure on the white straight out from the opening. So here white develops with knight g to f3 and black plays knight to c6. And now white plays bishop to b5 to release the pressure on the d4 pawn and minimize it with bishop to b5, pinning the knight to the king. So here black plays the first mistake of the game, which is he took on e4, and this move is dubious. Black surrenders the center and allows the white knight to take up residence there. In addition, he opens the path for the bishop on c1 as the knight takes on e4, and now the bishop is open. So here after knight takes e4, we are hitting this pawn. We're also threatening to come to d6 if we can. So here black plays bishop to d7. So if we took the knight on c6, then he can recapture, and also he is releasing this pin from the bishop, as white can maybe play knight to e5 and put a lot of pressure on the knight on c6. So here white plays bishop to g5. White does not miss the chance to develop with tempo, hitting the black queen. Admittedly, on his next move, he has to retreat somewhat to defend the light square bishop, so this bishop long does have its downside. An interesting alternative is the pawn sacrifice and white castle in this position. So here after knight takes d4, then bishop takes d7, and after queen takes d7, pawn to c3, then after knight takes f3, queen takes f3, white got a compensation for the pawn as he is going to go rook to d1, and with all of his pieces developed and the other rook to c1, with all of his pieces developed, then white is going to crush black. So let's come back to our main position. After bishop to g5, white does not waste any time. So here black plays queen to a5, attacking the king and attacking the white bishop. So here we are forced to block the check with our knight to guard our bishop and get out from the check. So here black plays the second mistake, which is taking on d4, yet allowing white another development after he recaptures with his knight on d4. Now white has got a huge lead in development, as we can see that the black queen is on the edge of the board and all of black pieces is sleepy on the 8th and 7th rank. So here black plays bishop to b4, pinning the knight and trying to develop his pieces, but unfortunately if we can see that all of these dark squares are weak, so here white castles and sacrifices the pawn on c3, as it will give him a strong dark square bishop controls those squares. So here after white takes the bishop and queen takes c3, and this is also yet another greedy move. Black is trying to say, you know what, I will take the pawn, show me what you will get me. And white is just white just said, I will crush you with this move, knight to f5. First of all, I am threatening knight to d6 with a decisive attack. So you are forced as black to accept the gambit and take my knight. And after you take my knight, then white here plays rook to e1 check. And after white checks, black responded with bishop to e6, as of course, if black intended to block the check with the knight, then there is rook takes e7, and after black recaptures, then here queen takes d7 with a decisive attack after king to f8 and bishop takes e7 and king to g6 and just rook to d1. White is completely crushing black. So here in this position, black is forced to go bishop to e6 to block the check, otherwise he is worse. And now here white immediately takes advantage of the dark squares by playing queen to d6, and you can see the dark square weaknesses that black greedily took the bishop for the knight for it, and white has got lead in development, a strong dark squares play. So here black plays pawn to a6, and after pawn to a6 then white played bishop to d2, hitting the black queen, but also rerouting this bishop to a more active square on b4, as it can be kicked with f6 or knight to f6 and blocking this diagonal. So here queen takes c2 and now bishop to b4. Now of course you can't take my bishop as your knight is pinned, and I am now threatening some rook takes e6 and mating attack is coming. A takes b5 was played in the game, and here we played white played queen to f8 check, forcing the white king to d7, and after rook e d1, yet another check, and after king to c7, then white takes the rook on a8, and now you can see that white is threatening some bishop to a5 with the mating attack. And also if black intended to capture the bishop here, then there is queen to d8 check, and after king to c6, then there is queen to d6, which is a checkmate. So instead of all of that, black said, you know what, you crushed me. Yeah, I am proven wrong. I am greedy by taking the pawn on c3 and just resigned the game. Now the second concept we have is the center and its significance. Now the game I want to show you is a memorial game of Robert Fischer, versus Samuel Rzeszewski. Excuse me if I pronounce that wrong. Now, it is hard to overstate the importance of the center in chess. From there, pieces can quickly reach every other part of the board. Therefore, the player who controls the center usually has the advantage. Now, the first game we are going to take a look at, Fischer plays e4, and after pawn to c5, then knight to f3, and now knight to c6, and Fischer goes to the open Sicilian with pawn to d4. And after the captures happens, black plays pawn to g6, which is the accelerated dragon. Here, white responds with bishop to e3, intended to go to the Yugoslav attack with queen to d2 and knight c3 and castle queenside. So here, knight to f6, hitting the pawn on e4. And now white plays knight to c3 to guard the pawn on e4. And here, black plays bishop to g7, continuing his development and entering the accelerated dragon modern variation. So here there is two moves. There is queen to d2, and after black castles, white will castles, then black can play pawn to d5, which is the theoretical move. So in order to prevent the pawn push to d5, white plays bishop to c4 to even control this square yet again, so black cannot play pawn to d5, and here black just castles. And after castles, black now is threatening to go knight takes e4, and after you recapture with your knight, then black plays pawn to d5, regaining his piece again. So here bishop to b3 is played to avoid knight takes e4, and now black plays the blunder or the dubious move, which is knight to a5. Now we all know that the knight on the rim is dim, but we don't really apply this rule here. Here we are trying to figure out the importance of the center, and we can see that this pawn can be pushed forward to kick away this knight, as the knight on c6 left its job from guarding the e5 square. So here knight to e8 was played, as all of the front squares are covered. So after knight to e8, here I will encourage you to stop the video and try to find the move. Now if you find bishop takes f7, I will congratulations. If black takes with the rook, then here there is knight to e6 trapping the black queen. After d takes e6, then white will go up a queen, and you can see that this bishop is controlling the b6 square, and this knight is taking away her queen available square, which is a5. And you can say, oh, black can take the bishop with the king, but yet still we can go knight to e6. Of course, this pawn is pinned. If black takes, then we will win the queen. So here, in case of black intended to take the knight, then here it is actually a forced checkmate after queen to d5. Then the king has to go to the f5 square, and after pawn to g4, then the king has to take only move. And now rook to g1 check. Now the king have a multiple choices. First of all, king f5 will hangmate in one with rook to g5. And if king h5, then here there is queen to g2 with a forced checkmate next move on g4 or on g5. Black can stop both. And after king h4, then there is bishop to g5. And after king to h5, then there is queen to d1 check. And after rook to f3, then queen takes f3 is actually just a checkmate. So here you can learn from how the center is super important on the opening. It is super important to keep that knight controlling the e5 square. And after the knight moves, then you can see how important that white has got a pawn on the center, which he can push forward and win the game by the move pawn to e5. Now let's go to our third, and the concept is do not make unnecessary pawn moves if you have not completed your development. Unnecessary pawn moves are a favorite decision of young players. Instead of a rapid development, we too often see unnecessary prophylactic measures or defense against non-existent threats. No matter how many times they are shown what this leads to or experience the consequences in their own games, the habit continues, but one must not lose hope of curing these weaknesses. One must just correct. Eventually, the water will wear away the stone. So here in the first game, white plays pawn to e4, and now black responds with the Caro-Kann, and now knight to c3 is played, and now black made the unnecessary move, which is pawn to b5, and actually black is a 2200 rated player, and white is 2500 rated player. So this is not just a beginner move or whatsoever. Now this move is that black is trying to go pawn to b4, kick away this knight and capture the pawn on e4. Now there is two variations, there is taking and there is pushing. Let's see quickly what happens if white takes the pawn on d5. Now, of course, black won't recapture on d5 and allow bishop takes b5 check. Black actually is gonna go pawn to b4, and after knight to e4, queen takes d5, hitting the knight, and after knight to g3, then white is a little bit better, but also black is maybe have a little bit space, so this is not the best way to respond to this b5 move. White plays pawn to e5, trying to take advantage and trying to claim space on the center. So here, black plays bishop to f5, which is a main move in the Caro-Kann that black is trying to develop the light square bishop and shuts it down with pawn to e6, unlike the French defense. So here, white goes aggressive and goes g4. I will kill you. I will try to attack you as fast and as quickly as possible. So here, the best move for black is to retreat his bishop back to d7, but here it is nonsensible to retreat. It is sensible to put the bishop on g6, as you just developed from there. You could have gone bishop to d7 in a first go. So here, white continues the aggression with pawn to h4, tried to go for h5, and h5 is actually trapping the bishop. To just quickly show you this, after h5, then you may say bishop to e4 is not trapping it, but after f3, the bishop is completely trapped in this diagonal. So here, in order to avoid that, then black does not go knight d7. Then here black goes h6 or h5. Now in the game, black plays h6, and after h6, then white continues attacking with pawn to h5, yet hitting this bishop, and after the bishop goes to h7, now here there is a theme sacrifice we all know, which is pawn to e6, and it is actually a theme sacrifice in the Caro-Kann when this variation occurs. So here black plays queen to d6. Of course, in case of black takes the pawn, then this bishop is shut down completely for the rest of the game, and white is gonna go bishop to d3 and quickly challenging this light square bishop, as g6 is a key square. Now let's say, for example, black traded, then after queen takes d3, then the queen is coming to g6 no matter what black plays in the next move. So let's come back after pawn to e6. Black is a strong player, so he understands that and plays queen to d6. Now here, white continues the initiative and played e takes f7, checking the king, so the king must take. And now white just plays pawn to g5. He says, you know what, your king is there. I will try to blow your king away from the board, and I will just try to open up this side of the area of the board, as now your king is there and it is super weak, so I want to open more lines and more files to attack you. So here black's trying to play, you know, super prophylactically and super solid, and he plays bishop to f5, as also white was threatening g6 to win the bishop. So here white continues to play actively with queen to f3, of course hitting this bishop and also pinning it to the king. So here black plays pawn to e6 to defend his bishop, and now white even adds more pressure and plays bishop to d3, hitting this bishop. So here queen to d7 was played to defend this bishop via x-ray, and now white plays knight c to e2. Now the knight has done its job on c3 from the opening, as it was defending the e4 pawn, but now it can be kicked away with b4. And also white sees that how to put pressure on this bishop on f5, and the fastest way to put pressure is playing knight to e2 and knight to g3. Black finally takes on g5, and white takes back, bishop takes g5, and now black plays bishop to e7, and now you don't really want to trade on e7. You want to guard your bishop and continue all of your development with knight to h3 as played in the game, to guard this bishop, as now if black takes on g5, then knight takes g5 is going to happen with check, and now the knight is going to be mysterious knight on g5. So here black plays knight h6 also himself to try to defend his bishop and to secure the f5 square. So here white goes with his initial idea and plays knight to g3 to even add more pressure on the black's bishop. And now you can see that this knight is hitting this, and also the knight on h3 might come to g5 later and hit the pawn on e6. Now this knight for black, it is the super dubious move. You can see that here all of the black pieces is developed and the black position is actually crammed, but you know, this knight has really no good way to go. So here black plays knight to a6 to try to continue his development, and now white just castles queenside, and white is just having fun here in this area of the board, as I told you, and black really got no counterplay on this area where the white king exists. So here black plays bishop to f6 to try to unpin this bishop and try to challenge the bishop on d3. And now instead of white trading the dark square bishops, white actually took the knight on h6, and now white is saying, you know what, I had enough, and also this bishop is hanging right now. So bishop takes d3, and after bishop takes d3, then white throws an intermezzo, which is an in-between move, which is bishop takes g7, hitting the rook and also threatening queen takes f6. So here black must recapture the bishop on g7, and now rook takes d3, yet to get another attacker to the game. The queen is perfectly placed, so there is no point taking with the queen on d3. So here rook a to f8 was played, and now white is trying to go really aggressive and trying to finish the game. So he played queen to g4 check, and now after king to g7, then white plays pawn to f4 to try to get this knight to g5, where it is going to hit the king and hit the pawn. And in case of white played knight to g5 and the black captures, then we are going to have two connected pass pawns, which will decide the game immediately. So here black plays king to e7 to avoid knight g5 with check. So here white goes knight to g5 anyways, hitting the pawn, putting pressure on the pawn on e6. Maybe later on he can double up his rooks and win the game. on e6 on the e6 square. And now finally this knight comes to the game with knight to c7 to trying to guard the pawn on e6 in an advance. So here you can see that all of white pieces is optimum, but this knight on g3 really got no future, no jumps to f5, no jumps to e4. So here white's figuring out, if my knight was on f3, then it can come to e5, and it will also support my other knight on g5. So he played knight to f1 to try to go knight d2, knight to f3. And now black is trying to run with his king, so he played king to d6. And now white goes knight to d2, and after knight to d2, black is lacking in the counterplay, so he played queen to g7. You know, he is pinning the knight, he is trying to put pressure on d4, so white plays knight d to f3, just guarding his knight and also guarding the d4 pawn. And now black plays rook to e8 to ensure that this pawn is safe, and now white gets his last piece into the game with rook to e1, and now black plays c5. And of course, if I ask you what move you will play here, you are going to answer d takes c5 with check, exposing the king yet again. Now, if we can flip the board and see black, actually the king is the most developed piece, but unfortunately for black, we are not playing an end game, we are playing a middle game, and it's not good idea to get your king to the middle of the board on the middle game. So here, white continues throwing punches with knight to e5, threatening some knight to d7 or knight to f7 or knight to g6. Now this knight is super strong, and black here plays king to b6. He is trying to run to the queen side and hide his king there. White says, you know what, where are you going? I am gonna catch you. And he plays queen to g1, delivering a check diagonally to the black king. So here black runs anyway to the b7, and now rook h3. And what rook h3 is doing, it is overprotecting the pawn on h5, and also maybe preparing to play h6 and h7, and this passed pawn is gonna win the game. So here rook to f8 was played, and now queen to g4, hitting the pawn on e6, and now bishop to e7. And after bishop to e7, then white plays knight to g6, forking the rooks and also hitting the bishop. And black responds with rook to f5. He's saying, okay, take my rook, and let me survive. And white just goes boom and plays knight to e6, which is a very explosive move, as now your rook is hanging and I am hitting your queen, I am hitting your knight. You can see that those knights are really deciding the game here, and why black just had enough and black resigned the game. Thank you guys for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure if you want to refute the King's Gambit, to check our latest video. Also check out the French defense where we made, and how to punish the Caro-Kann in our videos. And goodbye.